Prison sentences can be a very controversial topic. It can be a frustrating experience to watch a violent criminal leave prison having served just a few years, but on the other hand, it is equally exasperating to see a minor offence treated like it's the worst transgression in the world. Then, there are the sentences that span hundreds or even thousands of years. Though it's simply not feasible for humans to spend such a lengthy amount of time in jail, the idea is to send a message that such behaviour will not be tolerated. Join us for this video as we examine 5 of the longest prison sentences of all time. Chamoy Thipyaso. Probably the most famous example of someone being sentenced to thousands of years in prison is Chamoy Thipyaso, a Thai woman who was once employed by the Petroleum Authority of Thailand. While in her 20s during the 1960s, Thipyaso set up something called a chit fund. The savings scheme is most often used in India and has been a great help in financing developments across the country. Thipyaso's chit fund was named the My Chamoy Fund and was set up a little differently. It was made to appear similar to something like an oil share, offering investors high returns on their money, and nobody suspected anything was amiss, in part thanks to her connections to the Royal Air Force and the Petroleum Authority of Thailand. She and her fund were seen as legitimate, and at its peak, over 16,000 people signed for it, including members of the royal household and prominent individuals who were part of the military. The scheme ran until the mid-1980s before it was discovered to be a scam, with the pyramid scheme leading Thipyaso to defraud her investors of somewhere between $200 and $300 million. The My Chamoy Fund was shut down, and Thipyaso was arrested for her part in the scheme. She was subsequently held by the Air Force in secret and eventually went on trial. On July 27, 1989, Thipyaso and 7 of her accomplices were convicted of corporate fraud, and Thipyaso was sentenced to 141,078 years in prison. She still holds the Guinness World Record for the longest prison sentence of all time. Despite the extraordinarily lengthy sentence, Thai law at the time stated that the maximum sentence that could be served for fraud was 20 years. However, she ultimately served for less, as she was released in 1993, having spent just 8 years behind bars. Mehmet and Fatih Aydın. Mehmet Aydın was born in Turkey in 1991. Unlike Chamoy Thipyaso, he was eventually arrested following the creation of a Ponzi scheme, which he and his brother, Fatih, ran for several years. In August of 2016, Mehmet founded a mobile gaming app in northern Cyprus named FarmBank, which was inspired by the game Farmville, and claimed that investors in the project would see massive returns. Investors would download and play the game, using real money to purchase virtual animals, produce, and farming equipment. According to Mehmet, the money used would then go towards real livestock in various farms across the country, and investors would be paid for time spent playing the game. In Turkey alone, the app had over 350,000 investors and a further 150,000 from abroad. However, it wasn't long before the cracks in the scheme began to show when, in 2017, financial regulators filed a complaint following several accusations from users that the company had not followed through on its promises. In a single year, Mehmet Aydın scammed around 1.6 billion Turkish lira, the equivalent of around $187 million, from around 132,000 investors. In January 2018, the company stated that it had stopped accepting new users, and later that month, Mehmet claimed that he could not pay back investors' money on time because, following the series of complaints made in 2017, banks had reportedly refused to work with him. In the spring of 2018, reports began to emerge that 26-year-old Mehmet had fled the country and that he'd sold his shares in the company in December 2017. On March 14th, the Turkish government began investigating the company on charges of aggravated fraud and founding a criminal organisation. As part of the investigation, 3 people, including Mehmet's wife, were arrested, and further warrants were released for the apprehension of 19 other individuals. Assets of the company were also seized around this time, including around 1,000 cattle from a dairy farm. After fleeing Turkey, Mehmet headed to Uruguay, where he reportedly started up a construction company. According to a report by the BBC, the 26-year-old had dabbled in all sorts of schemes before Farmbank, including attempting to start a rap career and selling glasses on the internet, which he claimed would allow wearers to see people naked. Mehmet was finally apprehended in 2021 when he turned himself in to the Turkish embassy in Sao Paulo, Brazil, in July of that year. He would soon claim that he had never promised anyone any profit and that he'd established the investor portion of the company when the game began to make it big. He added, "Those who become members of the game do not have a share in real farms, and thousands of members receive the money they win in the game in cash." He maintained that he never intended the game to be used for fraudulent purposes and always acted in good faith. At his final hearing, Mehmet reportedly stated, "I did not make any false statements. I want my acquittal." However, the acquittal never came. In February 2025, he was handed a prison sentence of 45,376 years for defrauding investors of millions of dollars. His brother, Fatih, was convicted of theft using electronic data processing systems, banks, or lending institutions, establishing an organization for the purpose of committing crimes and laundering the assets acquired from an offence. 7 others were given the same sentence on the same charges. However, 6 of those people are still to be apprehended. A further 11 defendants were given various sentences for similar charges. The 2004 Madrid train bombings. In Madrid, Spain, a set of coordinated, near-simultaneous attacks began on March 11, 2004. These bombings specifically targeted commuter trains and started at 7:37 that morning. In total, 10 bombs exploded on 4 trains, killing 191 people and injuring over 1,800 more. The devastating assault, which took place just 3 days before the country's general elections, has been referred to by news outlets as Spain's 9/11. 3 days later, a spokesman for Al-Qaeda claimed responsibility for the attack, although no evidence has ever been found to support the involvement of the group. In the immediate aftermath, both the Spanish government and the media accused the ETA of involvement. The ETA was an armed Basque nationalist and far-left separatist group that operated between 1959 and 2018, with one newspaper outlet, ABC, claiming that the assault was ETA's bloodiest attack. The ETA, however, denied any and all involvement. In the hours following the attack, 3 other bombs were located, one of which had not detonated, while 2 were accidentally set off by deactivation specialists. All of the explosives were thought to have been carried on board inside backpacks, and investigators began looking into several people who had been spotted in ski masks getting on and off the trains several times in the early hours of the morning. Shortly afterwards, a vehicle was found parked outside of the same station where the men in ski masks had been seen. The car contained detonators, several mobile phones and audio tapes of verses from the Quran. Notably, the 13th bomb found, which had not exploded, used a mobile phone as a timer and required a SIM card to activate the alarm and set it off. On March the 13th, investigators made their first arrests in the case after tracing the SIM cards. 3 Moroccan individuals and 2 Pakistani individuals were arrested, although only one of them, Zamal Zogum, was eventually prosecuted. In 2007, 21 of 28 defendants were ultimately convicted on at least one charge for their part in the Madrid bombings, which is considered Europe's most Islamic attack. Although many believe that the ringleaders escaped justice after taking their lives in an explosion at a safe house around 3 weeks after the attack. Jamal Zougam, who planted at least one bomb, and another Moroccan national named Othman El Ghanoui, who helped transport the dynamite, were both sentenced to over 42,900 years in prison for 191 counts of murder and 1,856 counts of attempted murder. A Spanish individual named Emilio Suarez Trasores, who supplied the dynamite, was given more than 34,000 years, although he was expected to be released in 40. Notably, the maximum sentence in Spain that can be served is 40 years. Another man named Rabé Osman was acquitted, despite being accused of being an essential part of the plot. Evidence against him was minimal, and his lawyers argued that the wiretapped recording presented in court where he claimed to be the mastermind had simply been mistranslated. Notably, he was already in prison in Italy for other offences. 18 other individuals were found guilty of charges such as belonging to a terrorist group and trafficking explosives. Charles Scott Robinson. The longest sentence handed out not just in Oklahoma but in the US as a whole is that of Charles Scott Robinson. Little is documented about Robinson online, but he was born on April 18th, 1964, and although he seemed to be somewhat of a career criminal, he had mostly served time for non-violent offences before 1994, including burglary, attempted burglary, possession of a stolen vehicle, and concealing stolen property. However, Robinson's life changed dramatically in the early 1990s when he sexually assaulted a 3-year-old girl. On December 14th, 1994, he was convicted of rape by instrumentation, 2 counts of forcible oral sodomy, and 3 counts of indecent or lewd acts with a child under 16. He was subsequently given 5,000 years in prison for each offence, with each term to be served consecutively, totaling 30,000 years in prison. The jury had suggested the 5,000 years per offence sentence because they were unable to give him life without parole, but noted that Robinson's crimes were so horrific that they wanted him out of society and behind bars for good. The jury's foreman, a woman named Laura Bixler, stated, "All of us have read in the paper about early release. We've seen too many instances of it," she added. "We can send a message to the offender that we are not going to tolerate it. We don't want him to have a chance of ever getting out again." Jurors deliberated for just 35 minutes before finding 30-year-old Robinson guilty. District Judge Dan Owens agreed with the suggestion of the jurors, telling Robinson in court, "By doing that, I think I can assure you that you will spend the rest of your natural life in the confines of the Department of Corrections. It has also been stated that even if Robinson was paroled on each count every 13 years, he would still serve 78 years behind bars. Under this sentencing, he would not be paroled until the age of 108. Darron Anderson and Allan Wayne McLaurin. Notably, Robinson is not the only American to be handed an enormous jail sentence courtesy of Oklahoma. In Tulsa in 1993, a jury found both Darron Anderson and Allan Wayne McLaurin guilty of several offences following a brief crime spree that involved robbery, kidnapping, and the rape of a woman in Tulsa County. Together, the pair received a combined 6,475-year sentence, which at the time was the harshest punishment seen in Tulsa County for a case that had not involved murder. However, those sentences were reversed by the Court of Criminal Appeals, which declared that the trial judge had instructed jurors that a defendant is presumed not guilty rather than presumed innocent. According to the Oklahoman, the pair's sexual assault victim was a newlywed at the time of the assault and reported that she'd been raped and sodomized after her car was rammed off the highway, US 75. She was subsequently moved from the highway to a motel room and eventually to her home, where she managed to call the authorities. The district attorney, Bill LaFortune, stated that the pair were predators and said evidence indicated that 13 acts of sexual abuse had been carried out during the ordeal. Prior to this 1993 assault and robbery, Anderson had 3 prior convictions, 2 for burglaries in 1986 and 1 for a 1989 robbery. McLaurin had been convicted once in 1988 for burglary, A third perpetrator was reportedly involved in the assault, but he was not charged. It's unclear why. During the initial trial, Anderson was sentenced to 2,200 years in prison. However, he was found guilty once more at his retrial, and the jury sentenced him to 11,250 years behind bars. His conviction is broken down as follows: 2,000 years each on 2 counts of rape, 2,000 years each on 2 counts of forcible sodomy, 1,750 years for assault with a dangerous weapon, and 500 years each on single counts of burglary, robbery, and larceny. His sentence holds the record for the longest prison sentence given as a result of an appeal. McLaurin, meanwhile, was sentenced to 21,250 years following the retrial. It was broken down as follows: 2,000 years on each of 4 counts of rape, 2,000 years on each of 4 counts of forcible sodomy, 1,750 years for kidnapping, 1,500 years for assault with a dangerous weapon, and 500 years on 2 counts of robbery and 1 count each of larceny and burglary. Notably, McLaurin appealed his sentence, and it was reduced by 500 years.